Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're here with Aimee, Miriam, and myself, Veronica. Aimee and Miriam, where are you both joining us from?
From the Sunnyvale office.
Yeah, we're in Google's TC1 right now.
Nice. And I'm joining from home. But I just wanted to take the time to welcome everyone. I hope everyone has been enjoying all the amazing sessions that were lined up today. And I want to kind of set the tone for our panel today. We're focusing on how Miriam, Aimee, and I leveraged our help desk experience to land a technical role in security. And we are so excited to share our story and our journey with you all, but we also want to make sure that we make this an interactive session. So please, if you have any questions or comments, throw them in there. We want to hear from everyone. So let's go straight into introductions. We'll go in order, Aimee, Miriam, and then myself, and let's talk about our background, our current role, and maybe a hot take or a key takeaway that you want everyone to walk away from this.
Yeah, so I can go ahead and start. Hi, everyone. My name is Aimee Jasso. I am a systems development engineer here at Google. I work with our detection and response operations team. And my background, culturally, career-wise, it's all over. Culturally, I'm Mexican, first generation, and culturally, career-wise, it's kind of been all over. Started with a lot of help desk roles. Did some revenue management, realized it wasn't for me, went back into the technical aspect of things, landed my job here at Google, and I've been here for 3 years now, almost 3 years now.
Nice.
Thank you, Aimee.
So like Veronica said, my name is Miriam Crichlow. I'm also a systems development engineer here at Google. I work in mergers and acquisitions in our security tooling team. My background, I come from primarily help desk as well, having worked at AECOM on a government contract, and then at a small engineering firm in San Francisco, and now working at Google, having previously worked in a IT position here at Google as well. So yeah, it's been an interesting career path up to this point. So yeah, I'm excited to share it with everyone today.
Thank you both. And I would like to note that both Aimee, myself, and Miriam, we were part of the IT residency program at Google. So we all kind of went through our a very similar help desk role at Google, and then transitioned into another ladder, maybe 20 months into it. But yeah, thank you both for sharing that with us. I'm Veronica, and just like Aimee, I was born in Mexico City, moved here when I was 1. I had no idea as a kid, right? Like if you would tell me right now that I'm a security engineer at Google, if I were to tell that to my little self, I would, my first question would be to my future self be like, what is security, right? Like I had no idea that this existed, and I had no idea about the technical space at all. So for me, this has been like a huge win. But yeah, that's my background. Like Aimee and Miriam, I also started at Helpdesk. I kind of just did it as a way to like pay for college, and then I realized that I was pretty good at it, right? Like I feel like maybe growing up in an immigrant home, like you are kind of like your parents helped us, especially if they're maybe only Spanish speaking. Like these are things that I had to figure out all the time, and so having the helped us experience was kind of very second nature to me. And then the best part was like learning all the different careers that you can get into, and all the other things that you can try with that help desk foundation. So yeah, moving on. After now that we've shared our background, we have a set of questions, and I would like to take the time to thank my friend Anna for helping us come up with these questions. I feel like these are kind of going to encompass like what our journey has been and how we got to our current role. But again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to add it to the comments. So we'll start with the first one, right? Like we're going to do a general, how did we get into the security space? We want to touch on maybe how did our help desk experience help us land a role here, or maybe what captivated your interest in security, or when did you know that you wanted to work in security? Aimee, Miriam, let us know.
Yeah, I can go first. I think for me, I had been focused on the systems administration side of things for quite some time. And for me, the landing a role in security was a little bit more of a kind of unexpected, if you will. I hadn't really considered security as like an area for me to further explore. So when I landed the role within security, it opened up a whole bunch of different views about security. You begin to get exposure to areas and pieces that you had no idea that existed, or that, as a company that we were so invested in. And so, it definitely became a field for me to, just become a lot more aware of. Once in the field, once in the role now in security, it's an area that I want to just continue to explore and continue to dive deep into. So as new projects come up where we're required to have, new skills, or we're getting exposure to other aspects of security, I'm like, yes. So yeah, to answer the question, it was a little bit more, not directly intended, but I'm very happy it did, because again, it's allowed me to, dig a little deeper into the security world and just be more aware of what we care for as a company, maybe for your personal, like yourself, your phone, what security aspects should we be very careful about, your personal laptop, your data, all of these different things that I probably didn't really pay much interest to. Now I'm on top of all the time, and probably sharing with friends, like, with your phone, don't leave it unattended, or you add more security, or add a two-factor authentication to everything. So it's a lot more of awareness and kind of sharing that with the rest of my network, which is really neat.
Thank you, Aimee. What about you, Miriam?
So for me, I had never really considered security. Once I got out of college, I was just kind of like, I want to work. I have student loans. And so I leaned into the help desk aspect because I had done that in college. And then in my role at Helpdesk at Google, it was coming to the point where it was like, what do I want to do next? Because I've done Helpdesk, I think I have a good handle on it, and it's like I want to explore the other options that are out there. And so, similar to Aimee, I found the like system administration, where it was like there's some coding, there's some aspects that are like similar to Helpdesk, but then specifically the team that I'm on now, the security aspect was something I'd never really thought about. And then I was like, this makes sense. I like the work of mergers and acquisitions. I like knowing things before other people. And so working in the security and getting to be on like the other side of things and being like, how do we secure Google's infrastructure, and how do we take care of these like companies that are coming in to like the Google Alphabet like landscape, and being like, we need to ensure that they're like at Google standards, but also like encouraging them to like, institute like don't share passwords, and like having come from like a small engineering firm before working at Google, where it was like that was a normal thing to be like, yeah, people just know each other's passwords, and like no one has multi-factor authentication, and like if like your computer is out of date, it's okay. And so now working in a security field where it's like those things are like top of mind consistently in like my day-to-day work, in my personal life, just thinking on like, I need to be on top of this because it's security is not going anywhere. So making sure that it's like a primary focus has been really good for my career and personally.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I like the endless curiosity that security gives you. And also, once you see things through like a security lens, you realize that like the world out there is a hot mess and there's a lot of work to be done. And like you both have said, security is not going anywhere. And for me, at least, the way that I came across security was I went to the 2019 Grace Hopper conference. And if you are not familiar with that, it's like the world's largest tech conference for women in the tech industry or the computer science space. And I was surrounded by so many like amazing folks, like just amazing backgrounds. They were doing really cool work. But I felt so rejected because I didn't come from that background. So every time I went to a booth, it was like rejection all over again for every single one. And I'm like, okay, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing wrong? Why am I being rejected so much, right? And I mean, I think to this point, I had realized that, okay, Helpdesk was a great foundation, but it wasn't the end all be all. And it took me a few years to understand that, right? Like, I didn't get a lot of support from managers. And like, I think what Davina said in the last presentation about, you know, just dealing with managers who are not looking out for your best interests. I think I ran into that a lot. And so I kind of had to take it upon myself to look, you know, be curious and check out what else was out there, right? Like I already had years of like this help desk IT support experience. Well, what are the different branches that I can go off and leverage those skills with, right? So I'm at the conference. I somehow ended up attending a bunch of security sessions because at the time I had what do you call it? I had a deal with my boss at the time that if he let me go to the conference, right, then I would have to come back and give a presentation on something that I learned. So I'm like, oh, great, security. Like, those sound interesting. Let me do that and do a presentation on that. And little did we know that that would change my life because I attended, like, Jen Easterly's talk. I attended a talk from the CEO of Girl Scouts at the time, and they were doing they were focusing on bringing like cyber awareness to Girl Scouts, and you know, including those type of computer science programs for young women. And so I just completely fell in love with it. And then I joined Google as an IT resident at the same time as Miriam. And as soon as I joined, I already knew that I was going for security. So I was very, I guess I was very strategic about what I did in order to get to that role. But yeah, I feel like we all have different stories of how we all came into security or what developed our interest. And I feel like that's a very common thing in the security space. But it's always very interesting to learn about everyone's different, you know, pathway here. Now, let's dive into more of like the research that we did to get into our current role. Aimee, Miriam, do you want to share on like what research you had to do to prepare for it?
Yeah. So I knew that I already had a lot of skills, right, that were required in the systems administration area. Like networking, you know, I had done a lot of networking troubleshooting in my help desk role, had done a lot of troubleshooting with Linux and understanding how to navigate within the command line. So that was very helpful in knowing that, you know, okay, I'm pretty good with this. I have a good foundational, you know, knowledge for the role. However, I decided to start looking up internal positions for systems administration and kind of looking at what they required, right? What skills are they wanting someone to bring into this role? And I would sort of compare that to what I already had. So like, okay, they wanted networking. Okay, well, I'm good at networking, but what aspects of networking are they looking for, right? And so like the networking went a little bit more in depth than what I already knew, right? So with networking, I think in the help desk role, you typically troubleshoot, you know, like network connectivity and can you connect to the internet, you know, very basic things that can drill down a lot. But that was sort of like the level of networking that I knew. And so researching a lot of these positions enabled me to understand, like, okay, well, yes, you have this networking skill, but we want you to have it more in depth, right? So understand the ins and outs of TCP, understanding packets and packet headers, and knowing how traffic works, and packet mirroring, and understanding more intricacies of networking, right? So knowing what I didn't know was very helpful in sort of building that skill set, and understanding what I needed to work on in order to go for the role. Similar with Linux. Linux, I think, is a very important skill to have, across every role. But for me specifically, I had, again, done very basic troubleshooting and running basic commands with like disk space, when, again, troubleshooting in the help desk role and helping someone with like disk and space issues. But that was like the level for me. That was it. And so, again, researching positions and sort of understanding what that position required, right? How in depth of Linux do I need to study? What is it that I already have? What do I not have, right? And still understanding, again, what the level of gap that I had, so that I could pick up and prepare and be ready for those interviews, was very helpful for me. I think another thing that was very helpful for me was reaching out to individuals who were already in this position, and just talking to them about how else they prepared for a role, and just having those conversations about what they liked, what they didn't like, how they studied, what resources they found helpful, was very beneficial to me.
Thank you, Aimee. I love that, reaching out to other folks. Sometimes it's hard to do that, but networking is a powerful tool. What about you, Miriam?
So for me, again, since we're both working in the systems administration space, the big thing was definitely learning Linux. And so I came into working at Google very familiar with troubleshooting Windows, Mac, felt like those were my bread and butter. And then coming into Google, where it was a good amount of people use Linux, and I was like, I don't know Linux. And so it was building up that familiarity with not only personally being able to use Linux, but being able to troubleshoot it, getting more comfortable with the command line, and not just thinking of it as this amorphous thing, and being it can do a lot and is a very powerful tool, and really understanding that, and realizing how much time, if you really understand it, can be saved if you know what you're doing. So Linux was definitely a big one. And then I had also reached out to, he now is my manager, early in my career at Google, to just kind of get a sense of what is it like to be a system administrator in this space. And he emphasized, and to this exact moment will continue to emphasize, the importance of programming. And so he pushed me to really get into Python, and really dig into it, and to kind of get past this own personal barrier I had created of being I don't love coding. And now it's I like coding more, but I do a lot more of it in my day-to-day, and using Python for automation, just creating a lot of our security tooling, and leveraging things in Python, and taking advantage of a language that has a lot of libraries and a lot of functionality, similar to Linux, where if you know what you're doing, it can be a real game changer for you. And so those would be the two big things I would recommend, is definitely programming. You don't necessarily need to choose Python. There's a lot of languages out there, but finding one that works for you and makes sense for you, and that you're willing to put in the hours, because programming is learning any other language, where you have to really practice it. Once you understand the basics, putting in that time and energy. So definitely that was probably a big struggle, but now is a regular thing where I'm taking on Python projects and churning out code.
Yeah, Miriam, you and I both, being in the security engineer role, I kind of ran into the same issue, right? I did what Aimee and Miriam did, which was reach out to other folks and try to get more information on how they got there, their background, what they did to study for their interviews, or just, how do they stay up to date with the security space overall. And from there, I was able to kind of get an idea of like, okay, what are the non-technical roles in security and what are the technical roles in security? And for a moment, I was actually aiming towards maybe like a security policy role because I had like a huge level of imposter syndrome, and I already knew at this point that security engineering required coding knowledge. And in my head, I'm like, there's no way I can do that, right? Like, there's no way I can ever do this. And so it took a lot of help from like folks that I reached out to kind of get me in that headspace of like, yeah, I can learn this. I can do this, right? If they can do it, then like I can do it too. There's no reason why, like, if you put in the effort and you have, some grit, you can definitely learn it. But yeah, I think the researching part was like crucial to, I think, all three of us, right? Like getting a better idea of what our resume looked like and what kind of gaps we had, like almost doing a gap analysis of like, okay,
Yeah.
this is where I'm at, right? And this is where other folks, whether they're a system administrator or a security engineer, like what's on their resume, what type of things are they working on, what kind of personal projects that they have. And so it's always good to know what other people are doing, because if it worked for them, it might work for you too. And you also don't have to follow a paved road, right? Like you can create your own road and create your own journey, and explore different things too, because security has so many different domains. And at least for me, like I'm in enterprise protection, but I'm still open to other areas of security. So for me, I just see it as like, okay, I'm just getting started. I'm going to get a good foundation where I'm at, and then I'll have to do research once again, and in some time to figure out, okay, what other domains are out there? Is there something else that I'm curious about? But for now, I think I'm good where I'm at. And I think this leads perfectly into the role of like networking and mentorship. Now, Aimee and Miriam, like what role did networking and mentorship play in your journey to your current roles?
Well, I think the networking aspect was very important. Like we mentioned before, it was easy for us to reach out to a lot of the individuals that we had either worked with in the past or that we knew that were in a position that we were aspiring to get to, and sort of chatting with them and understanding, like asking questions about, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. Oftentimes knowing what worked was great, but also understanding and knowing what didn't work for them was very helpful, because just because it didn't work for them, whatever that may have been, whether studying a book or attending a conference or attending or getting a certificate, right? Maybe they didn't help for them, but you're a completely new, different person, and that approach might not actually work for you. So it was a lot of learning about, how to prepare, I think. But it was very helpful in that sense, in understanding more about the position. Reaching out to managers, reaching out to hiring managers was also very helpful in that networking space, because oftentimes they may have not been hiring, right? Or they may not have been open, or they might not have headcount on their team, but you opening that door and saying, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Would you have any recommendations as to how I can continue to grow or continue to improve while, headcount becomes available, or while, I don't know, whatever that reason may have been. But that was very helpful. And in terms of mentorship, I did have a couple of mentors who were very helpful throughout my journey. They would often, recommend resources, whether it was books or whether it was internal projects that I could participate in, so that I could continue to build upon those skills that I may have been lacking, or that I may need to probably strengthen a little bit more. So those were always very helpful, and I think essential to reaching, that that success, getting beyond and reaching the goal that I had in mind. But yeah, that's my take for it.
Thank you, Aimee. What about you, Miriam?
Yeah, I'd say I had several mentors, and throughout my like help desk background, and even in joining like ITRP at Google, you have people who are further along in the program who are all very ready and willing to help you, and they're all at their own stages in their career. Of like, they were able to recommend like Python courses for me and like Linux certifications that would be really helpful in getting ready for those interviews down the line. And one of the biggest pieces of advice I got was from someone, I think he was like a year ahead of me in the program, was to take on like 20% work. And so from there, it's like building up that confidence in those skills that you would need for the like interviews to take on that role down the line. And so I'm really glad that he said that, because that, like, I went out, networked, found a team that I really liked, and within that team found a mentor for my rotation, and he is a Python expert. And from there, I've really been able to take my skills in specifically Python from like, okay, I can like do a quick function to like, now I can actually like create tooling. And so that mentorship and taking on that 20% were really, really helpful. So, I mean, I can't really say enough about like networking, meeting the people who are in the roles or roles that you're even kind of interested in, just to kind of gauge like, do I want to do this? And having definitely the 20% emphasized to me that like, not only do I like system administration work, but I think I can do this more than 20% of the time. And that was what I really wanted moving into like a new position outside of the help desk and into security was, can I do this every single day? And will I be excited and will I be challenged in it?
+1 to everything you and Aimee said. I think it's so important to like know what your role consists of, because what happens if you go through the interview process, you get the role, and then you're there and you're like, maybe I don't like this, right? That's okay too, right? But it's always good to do your research, network, get mentorship, especially at a place like Google. When I first joined, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have access to all these people, right? Like, I've never had access to so many mentors. And so having that has been life-changing, right? Like, I've taken advantage of ERG mentorship programs. I've taken advantage of pretty much any mentorship opportunity that's been, sent out there in the universe. And, it helps because I think you need different types of mentors. You need maybe strategic mentors that are going to help you navigate your career in spaces like these. And I say that, right, coming from the perspective of being Latinx and being an immigrant and being, underrepresented in the tech industry and especially in the security industry, right? Like, I need strategic mentors who are going to help me navigate a space that was, maybe not meant for me a few years ago, but, we're here now. So I'm going to learn how to navigate the space, right? And also just overall, like, I need mentors who are going to help me, battle my own imposter syndrome or even my own self-doubt, right? Like, I had so many issues with learning how to code, and it was truly like a mental hurdle that I had to overcome in order to like even interview for this role. And with the help like of a bunch of mentors, I was able to overcome it, whether it was them giving me a safe space to be vulnerable and be wrong and learn from my mistakes, or it was just doing mock interviews. And again, another chance to be vulnerable, right? Because you have people literally judging you on your answers. But again, that's a great data point of, okay, like Aimee said, you need to know what you don't know. And, you what you do from there, it's totally up to you, but just understanding what areas you need to work on is huge. And then I also want to touch on like what Aimee mentioned about networking. I would like to add my own experience, right? I guess in my community, networking wasn't like a huge thing. And so that's another barrier that I had to overcome, being comfortable with reaching out to people, but I attended a really good session from some folks at Slack a few years ago and they mentioned something about being intentional with your networking, right? So if you're reaching out to someone for help, whether it's on LinkedIn or maybe someone else in your own company or your school, be intentional about what you need from them, right? Instead of saying like, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. I hope we get a chance to chat sometime." That might be too general. You might want to say like, "Hey, I see we go to the same school. I see we have a similar background. I'm really interested in your type of work. Would you be open to like a 20-minute chat?" Right? I would love to learn more about your background, how you got into your role, and I feel like being intentional with reaching out to folks has been super helpful because then, it's easy for them to say yes or no, and not everyone's going to say yes. That's okay. You move on to the next, but it sets you up for people to be more open and people to kind of know what to expect and better help you. And with that said, let's talk about some of the challenges that we've encountered, because I know I've encountered a bunch. But Aimee, Miriam, are there any challenges that like stick out for you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me and probably both of you has been being the only woman, being the only woman on the team, and oftentimes the only person of color on the team. Has been a challenge for me to, it's been a little difficult to overcome that sometimes, because I think when you can't, relate to your teammates, it makes it a little bit difficult for you to be comfortable, maybe be vulnerable among your team, or ask questions, or perhaps make a suggestion, or do things that would probably not be so difficult if the team was a little bit more diverse, if there were more women on the team, if there were more people of color. So that's been a big challenge for me. I would probably say it's the biggest one. Other than that one, I think I want to say that's a big one for me, actually. If you want to go
on. Yeah, I would share Aimee's sentiments of being the only woman on your team. And so there's the aspects of like the imposter syndrome that like we've all mentioned in some way, shape, or form previously is very real when you're the only woman on your team, because you become like the person who represents all women's opinions. And so you have like this weight on your shoulders of like, in every aspect, you're considering how you're perceived and what you're saying, does it make sense? And so you're second guessing yourself a lot. And it's like, that's when a lot of that mentorship that we mentioned comes in handy, because you have people, either mentors who are men or women, who are coming in and being like, you passed the interviews, you've proven that you can work on this team, they haven't fired you yet, like go ahead and say the things and ask the questions. And like that's easy to say now, but like I'm 6 months into my role and very much spent time just like, I will look into this. And like I will do my own research. That way I can go, and if I ask a question, I'm like, I have 50 different pages worth of information that has led me to the point that I'm now asking you this question. And so I would definitely say being the only woman on the team comes with its it is its own struggle. But as we said before, a part of it is finding that community. And so like thankfully, like all three of our teams now in our new roles all work with some degree of overlap. And so it's nice to talk to these other women that I know, and particularly women of color, and be like, what is it like for you being on this all male team? And like, are you seeing these kinds of things that I'm experiencing? And just like getting that validation of like, yes. Like, yes, I know what you're talking about. Or, oh, they're doing that to you too. Okay. Or, yeah, I've seen that. Or like just a general, like, you're not imagining this, or like partnering, finding opportunities to like work cross-functionally within our teams,
or working towards eliminating that, or making it a bit more raising awareness to that, to our leaders, and saying, hey, this is an issue, this is what we're seeing, and we actively want to work towards eliminating this, or making a lot more people aware of this, so that everyone knows what we're facing, and so our leadership knows that it's a bigger issue than we may perceive, right? So I think the partnership is also very important. Like Miriam said, having that community to go back and forth and like, is this happening to you? Okay, yeah, it's happening to me. Yeah, let's make a proposal and bring it up to our leaders.
Yeah. And not just raising the issues, but also just having other people there to encourage you. And just be like, if you're struggling with coding, finding someone else who's in a similar boat and being like, will you help me? And so like, I know Veronica had recommended resources. She gave me a template of like how she reaches out to people for like mentorship or networking, like finding like those, like ideally those other like women of color, just people who have similar experiences to you, and just asking for help and asking for mentorship, and you know, and help, and making sure that you're not just living with the struggles. Not letting yourself settle for less would be the big thing.
Yeah, I just love that. And I know that, you know, talking about that takes a lot of vulnerability from both of you. So I think we all appreciate that, right? Because it is a tough conversation to have. And I think this is where like the imposter syndrome comes in, right? Because I think what I've taken away from learning more about imposter syndrome and being in this space is that we have a legitimate reason to feel this way, right? When we're maybe the only person of color or Black person on the team, you are going to notice that, and it's, you know, it's not just in your head. This is a real data point that is going to make you maybe feel excluded, or like Miriam mentioned, you know, it's almost like you're representing your whole community, whether it's gender or race or heritage. So that's a lot of pressure to walk into a team with. And it, you know, I think it's good for our teammates to be aware of that, but it's very hard to have that conversation. So I appreciate that vulnerability, because it's a struggle, right? Like, and I think that's why it's important for, you know, especially us, when we get that level of mentorship, that we pay it forward, right? So the next person doesn't have such a difficult time like we did, right? Like it should just get easier down the line as we pay it forward. And hopefully, you know, that's the real case, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. But now that we've shared some challenges, how about we share maybe like your first win that made you feel confident, and, you know, made you feel like, I'm good at this. I belong here.
Ooh, do you want to go first?
Sure. My first win. So I would say my first win was in the 20% work that I had done. So I had identified a team that was familiar with ITRP. I was getting mentored by a few people on the team. And now was like the real challenge of like, okay, like the 20% isn't just like, oh, I have this like amorphous project. It was like actually having to turn something around for it and like resolve a bug. And so it was that like first piece of code that like I wrote completely independently, like just me sitting, thinking. It probably like I now could probably write that much faster, and would probably make a bunch of changes to how it was done. But it was just getting that first bit of code submitted, and like the way and like part of how Google does it is like someone else has to look at it and be like, that looks good to me, and like getting that first like, this looks good, like it does what it needs to do, it runs, it's not, you know, it's not crap, essentially. Just like getting past my own mental block of being like, yes, I've made coding this like big deal for myself, and now it's like I'm able to code, and I'm coding at Google, and like those are words that if you had asked me like years ago, I would have been like, that sounds fake. That's like that's not what you're going to be doing. But now it's like, yeah, like submitting code changes for me is now like part of my day to day. And so that's like a really nice feeling of going from like that first win of like, here's some decent code to like, yeah, this is now like, this is something I do.
I think for me, it may have been during my rotation as part of our support IT support experience and the program that we were part of. We had the opportunity to have 3 months of a rotation with another team. My rotation consisted of systems administration. I did it with a team that focuses on chips, on silicon chips. And so a lot of the work that I did with that team entailed coding, entailed working with Terraform, setting up different Slurm environments, and doing that by myself. And like Miriam said, working on a coding project and knowing that I had done that myself was like, it immediately got rid of my imposter syndrome, because I was like, oh my gosh, I did this. And I absolutely, definitely belong here. I am where I am supposed to be. Yes, I'm a woman of color, and I'm going to change that. It added so much empowerment to my career, to like me and my career. And I felt at that moment, I felt like I could do anything, right? Like there was nothing I couldn't achieve, because coding for me had always been, to this day, it's still like an issue or something that I struggle with. It's just not, it hasn't always been something that comes naturally. And so completing that project, getting that thumbs up from my team and saying, yes, it looks good, we can deploy it to, I forget how many thousands of servers we had. It was like, oh my gosh, you're joking. And I think after that, after completing that coding project, after completing my project with Terraform and deploying that as well, it was just like, I felt like I was on top of the world. Like I can do anything anyone assigns me ever,
I feel that, especially with like the coding. I feel like we share that sentiment of like, at least for me, right? Like I majored in business. I failed my only coding class at SF State a few years ago. And so when I failed it there, I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. But then I get here and I'm like, wait a minute. I need to learn how to code if I want this role. And at this point, it was like another opportunity that I was about to miss out on, because I told myself years ago that I wasn't good at this. Mm-hmm. Or another example, and I wrote a blog about this, is in one of my early IT jobs, when I started building that confidence, I mentioned or expressed my interest to my manager at the time, like, hey, like, I'm enjoying this. I think I'm pretty good at this. I see room for growth. I am interested in maybe like learning Python so that I can do what the senior techs are doing. And this guy said that I was too old, that if I had not been, coding since I was in high school, it was like too late to join the game, right? And me being naive, first generation, I believed him. Like I absolutely believed him. And I kind of, stayed there for a couple of years while I was finishing up my undergrad degree. And then I come across this security engineering opportunity, and it's almost like hitting a wall again. Like, dang, I can't, if I really want this job, now I have to like figure out a way how to like get out of my own head and learn how to do this. So I think the big win for me was passing my coding interview, or just like passing my interview period, right? Like landing the role of like an engineering role at Google. It's like, for me, I still wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is my job. Like now that I have the role, it's like, now I really have to this is what I wanted, right? Like it's almost, it's so surreal for me to be in this role, and it's almost like a mental thing of, yes, I'm super grateful that I have the role, but now it's like time to do the work. So I think adding to my first win is that I have a very supportive team, and I was very upfront with all of them when I joined the team, right? And I said, hey, like, I passed the interviews, but just a heads up, like, I don't have a coding background, so I'm gonna need a lot of like patience and support. And I feel like everyone has been like super, you know, super kind about it, right? Like, I have a few people on the team who have been helping me and mentoring me. I have my teammate Dorsa, who's taking an hour out of her life every week to teach me like computer science fundamentals, and then my manager who's supporting me doing like a developer program at Google. So I think like my win was for sure getting the role, but then also like getting that support to continue to grow in this space, because it goes back to what Davina said, right? Like, if you're under bad management, how are you going to grow, right? Like, you're not going to have that support system to move forward with stuff, to learn, to like develop your own career. And having that support system is like crucial to it. So yeah, thank you, Aimee and Miriam, for sharing that with us. I'm absolutely sure that we have many more wins along the way. So I'm just excited for all of us. Now let's see. Do we have any tips or tricks that we want to share for maybe how we prepped for interviews, or how we, prepped our resume? Anything like that?
Yeah, I think what was very helpful for me when it came time to do interviews was doing mock interviews. It was a time for me to be, be serious about it, be vulnerable too. These were peers that were in a role that I was interviewing for. And so having them ask the questions and sort of, putting yourself out there and answering the questions, maybe not the right answer, but it allowed me to know what I still needed to work on, what I still needed to prep on, or what I was already set on, right? Like, there were also areas where they were like, okay, you got this, you know the ins and outs of this. Let's maybe take a step back from studying this and focus more on this, right? So getting that feedback from them was very helpful in continuing to study and continuing to prepare for the upcoming interviews. As for the resume, that's an interesting one. I feel like I probably modified my resume a couple hundred times. Usually after I modified it to what I thought was, proper, I would usually also reach out again to someone and ask them if they could please review it, give me some feedback on what was probably unnecessary, or what I was probably over explaining, or maybe what I needed to add, right? Sometimes I think we're a little too modest and not include things that are probably very important. And so, yeah, reaching out to other people to ask them if they could review it and give me their feedback was also very helpful. Because getting their feedback and saying, actually, Aimee, you should probably remove this job. It's no longer relevant, or it's too far back, and you should probably add a little bit more of the certifications that you've received, or the courses that you're currently taking, so that people know that you're actively, studying for this or preparing for this. You're muted.
But I read your lips. You said Miriam.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I would say I would absolutely like +1 to what Aimee said. The mock interviews were super, super helpful. So I did mock interviews with a few people who had come out of the ITRP program, and then probably like half of the people that are on my current team, I did mock interviews with, which was incredibly helpful because they're in the role, they're on the team that I want to be on. And I was incredibly grateful that they made the time to like help me identify those gaps. And then we're like, we can tell that you're like still building that confidence of like, we could tell you knew the answer, but you're not just like coming out and saying it, you're kind of just dancing around it. And so really helping not only like for me to identify like, okay, I need to like brush up more on this in Linux, or like learn more about this in networking. It was also like, you need to be able to just like confidently say like, I know the answer to this. Like, knowing and being able to own what I knew in the interview was also incredibly helpful. So very grateful that I had those mocks to like help me get to that point of like, yeah, I do know this. I have been studying this for a while. Like I put in all this effort. Like I'm gonna do the thing. So yeah, definitely also when Aimee said about mocks. And then for the resume, I had so many people look at my resume, like people who are not on the same ladder as me, people just like generally getting a sense of like what is relevant, what isn't relevant, like even like formatting things and being like things I didn't even consider, like making sure that like I had like a bunch of like colors, like not a bunch of colors. It makes it sound like the resume was really unprofessional, but it was like not very clear in certain stages. And so making sure that like from an accessibility lens, like the like resume was like clean and straightforward, and making sure like formatting wise, like we've all applied to those jobs where if you upload your resume and not a PDF, the formatting is completely ruined. So like making sure that like if I put it in like a docx or a PDF or like any other format, that like the resume, like the main content was still there and it was still very like clean and obvious. So I'd say get a lot of feedback from various people and like do some of those formatting things to make sure that like your resume looks good and really represents like how good you are.
100% to all the things that you just mentioned. Mock interviews, do a lot of them and start early. Don't wait until, you feel like you need to know 100% of whatever you're studying. No. You're never going to know 100% of anything in security. And if anyone is telling you that they do, it is a lie, right? Like start early. That way, like Aimee and Miriam mentioned, you kind of know where you are and what you need to study. But yeah, I think Aimee and Miriam, you both have covered like really well what helped you prep for interviews and resumes. And I want to jump into a really good question in the comment section from Katya. Is it real? Oh, sorry, let me start over. Let me read it. Is it really a must-have skill knowing how to code in Python or other programming languages in order to succeed in a cybersecurity career? Do we have any thoughts on that you guys want to share?
I don't think I can go. Sorry, just jump
Go
in.
for it.
I don't think it's a necessary must-have. I did a little bit of coding. I currently do not code in my position. In my team is, like I said earlier, detection and response. So we are, sort of watching Google's network for malicious activity, right? And so being in that field, I don't need it. I think a bigger skill set that's needed for my team specifically would probably be on the networking side, understanding packets and packet headers and more on that side. So from my side, I would say no, but from your perspective.
So I would say definitely specifically for my team, programming in Python or Go is incredibly helpful, but it's more the nature of the work that we do that is like building security tooling. And as a result, like in order to build those tools, you do need to like a lot of times it is knowing like Linux, Python, Go. So for my team, yes, the coding is definitely something that would be like is crucial, but security has so many different like facets and aspects where like you could easily land a really, really good job and like really make a career out of it without coding. I would say the emphasis on coding is more if you want to be able to explore a lot of more of the like heavy technical aspects that come along with security. So if coding is something that's become daunting for you or something that you're just not interested in, add it as something as like a small, like try Python, try a little Go, try a little like C, and just like expose yourself to it and leave that always open to yourself as a possibility of like maybe at some point down the line you're gonna be like, I really do want to get into like software engineering. And it's like you've built that security experience, you've shown that you know what it takes to be a good engineer, and now you're just adding like a little extra sauce on top and that you can also code.
That's some really good advice. And I agree with it. When I was researching different roles in the security space, I found that there are a lot of non-technical roles that don't require coding. So I think my overall sentiment is that it's not going to hurt you to learn how to code and have that skill, but it's not a requirement for all the roles. And this is where the research comes in, right? Like if you're looking for a specific role, I recommend maybe looking at 4 to 5 similar roles in different companies to kind of get an idea of what they're looking for and what the expectations are. And that will give you a really good idea of like, maybe I need to look for another role, or make you rethink like, oh, maybe I should learn this skill, right? Totally up to you. And I think Mary A in the comments listed some really good advice on certifications and conferences and updating, having your LinkedIn updated. And I feel like this goes well into the other question. And I apologize if I mispronounced her name, but Talil, they commented, I've noticed a lot of applications for non-traditional engineer positions require personal statements. Do you have any advice on writing these? I just want to jump in there and echo what Mary A said, and having your LinkedIn reflect your resume. That kind of goes hand to hand. So for me, I think it was important to be like authentic, in especially coming from like a non-traditional background. It was important to be authentic and kind of say like, hey, maybe I don't have this computer science background and I don't have any formal engineering training, but I've done this. I've taken this on my personal, or I've taken up these hobbies on my personal time, and I've used a bunch of resources to learn this on my own. So I would just say be authentic and kind of, don't be afraid to tell people what you're working on. I feel like I've run into a bunch of folks who are shy to say like, hey, I'm studying this, or maybe I'm using Code Academy to do this, or I'm learning from a course in Udemy. Just be open about it. But I think it's time to wrap up. Any last minute advice from Aimee or Miriam that you want to leave us with?
I would say never question your worth. You belong there. Don't let imposter syndrome get to you. You got this.
Yeah, definitely what Aimee said is remember your worth. If you get an offer that seems low, it might be. Make sure that you are getting paid what you're worth. Know that you've put in the effort, the time, you have the skills, and especially as women, like it's very easy to doubt yourself and to like feel like, oh, this is just who I am. But continue to push yourself, strive for more. There are plenty of women out there who will back you up.
Thank you, Aimee. Thank you, Miriam. Appreciate it. Lisa, thank you for helping us. And everyone, thank you for joining us. I hope this was helpful. Please look us up on LinkedIn and connect with us. And don't forget to pay it forward.